In autumn 1856, rural Medina County, Ohio, uncovered a horror so disturbing local papers kept it secret for nearly 30 years. Beneath the Grimby home for displaced children lay 23 small, unmarked graves. Children supposedly sent west to new families, their names erased from all records. The Grimby family celebrated Methodist benefactors and recipients of state funding, had been running something far darker than an orphanage. Founded in 1851 by Jeremiah and Martha Grimby, the institution was seen as a model of Christian charity, especially for taking in children. Other homes rejected those with deformities, trauma, or disciplinary issues. From the outside, their work appeared noble, earning praise from inspectors and generous donations from the state and Methodist donors. Yet locals noted the home's eerie silence. No laughter, no play, only the explanation that the children were learning discipline. The truth began to surface when photographer Edmund Hartwell arrived to document the orphanage for a state welfare survey, guided by a driver who had never seen a child outside the property. In 15 years, Hartwell found a cold gray building with barred-looking windows, no toys, and immaculate but lifeless grounds. Jeremiah Grimby met him at the door, visibly displeased, resisting the visit under the pretext of not disturbing lessons. Hartwell insisted presenting state authorization. But as negotiations dragged on, one detail became chillingly clear. The building, said to house dozens of children, was utterly silent. No footsteps, no voices, no signs of life. When Hartwell remarked on the unnatural silence, Martha Grimby appeared beside her husband, wringing her hands and whispering, "Our children are very well disciplined. They know better than to cause disturbances during lesson time." Jeremiah eventually agreed to allow photographs, but under strict conditions, Hartwell could shoot the classroom and dining hall only when empty, speak to no children, and remain under Caleb's constant supervision. Jeremiah explained that some children had endured terrible traumas, and surprise encounters with strangers could trigger days of hysteria. Inside the building felt more like a prison than a home, with long, bare corridors lined with unmarked wooden doors, the air heavy with pine disinfectant, and something far less pleasant. In the second-floor classroom, 30 identical desks faced a plain podium, but no books, papers, or personal effects were in sight. Caleb claimed personal items caused theft and fighting, and that the children were given what they needed only when they needed it. As Hartwell set up his camera, he heard faint moans, coughing, and muffled sobs from deeper inside. Caleb dismissed it as illness, saying they kept an infirmary. The dining hall was just as sterile: long wooden tables, a simple serving counter, no sign of varied meals or wear from daily use. While photographing, Hartwell dropped a lens cap, and reaching under a bench, he felt rough carvings. In the dim light, he read the words, "Help us." The plea haunted him, but 3 weeks passed before he could act. Back in Cincinnati, ordinary tasks delayed him, though the memory of that message gnawed at him. He began discreet inquiries with fellow photographers, all of whom described orphanages as lively, noisy, and full of evidence of learning and play, nothing like the Grimby home. A conversation with Samuel Hutchkins, a clerk at the Ohio Department of Public Welfare, deepened Hartwell's unease. Hutchkins said the Grimby home was perfect on paper, spotless discipline with every child accounted for. But he had never seen the same child twice, and all were said to be sent west to vague destinations, with no way to follow up. Examining the records, Hartwell found that in 5 years, the Grimby home claimed to have placed 127 children, all with Western farming families. Yet there was not a single letter or report from any of them. Further inquiries among travelers and merchants revealed no one who had ever transported a Grimby child west. Then, while reviewing his photographs in the darkroom, Hartwell spotted something he had overlooked during his visit, something that would change his investigation entirely. In one of Hartwell's dining hall photographs, a faint, shadowed figure emerged, small face pressed to the window eyes, wide with unmistakable terror. The grainy image was human, desperate, and chilling. Determined to learn the truth, Hartwell returned to Medina County, avoiding direct confrontation with the Grimbeys and instead speaking with longtime locals. Their accounts revealed a pattern of deliberate isolation and unsettling habits. Storekeeper Sarah Kellerman noted that, unlike other institutions, the Grimbeys never came to town for children's supplies, only for adult provisions, cleaning agents, and conspicuously large amounts of lime, always delivered directly. County physician Dr. Marcus Tilton admitted he had never once been called to treat a child from the orphanage in 10 years, an impossibility in his medical opinion. In November 1856, Hartwell began covert surveillance from a grove 200 yards away. Over 3 days he saw no signs of children, no laundry, no outdoor play, no large-scale meal preparation. Each night, just after sunset, Caleb Grimby carried burlap-wrapped bundles of varying sizes, many disturbingly small, to the woods behind the staff quarters. On the third night, Hartwell saw lanterns moving methodically in the forest, accompanied by the scrape of shovels and the thud of tools striking earth. When he took his evidence to Sheriff William Bradenton, the lawman initially dismissed the concerns, citing the family's spotless reputation and community standing. Only after repeated pressure and the presentation of Hartwell's photographs and witness accounts did Bradenton reluctantly agree to act, though his approach would be discreet, mindful of the Grimbeys' deep political ties. On a cold December morning, Bradenton and Hartwell arrived unannounced. The reaction was immediate. Jeremiah faltered in his explanations. Martha vanished into the kitchen, and Caleb's barely restrained hostility turned his answers sharp and erratic. When Bradenton pressed to see the children, Caleb claimed they were observing a day of silent reflection, a Quaker-inspired practice. Unmoved, the sheriff insisted, prompting a tense, whispered family conference at the staircase, while Bradenton and Hartwell waited in the parlor, the air thick with the sense that something long hidden was about to come to light. What followed was a performance meant to reassure, but instead deepen suspicion. The Grimbeys led Bradenton and Hartwell to a large upstairs room where around 20 children sat at separate desks, perfectly still, their eyes fixed downward. They ranged from about 6 to 15 years old. But none met the visitor's gaze. When the sheriff asked simple questions, names how long they'd lived there, answers came in faint, hesitant whispers, sounding more rehearsed than sincere. Hartwell's photographer's eye caught unsettling details. Hollow cheeks pallor the sluggishness of the malnourished. Several bore visible injuries, bandaged hands, healing cuts, and one girl with faint finger-shaped bruises on her neck. When Hartwell tried to photograph them, Jeremiah quickly intervened, claiming the children were too traumatized to be photographed. The most chilling moment came when a boy in the back raised his hand, locking eyes with Hartwell in silent plea, only for Caleb to position himself behind the boy's chair. The boy dropped his hand, instantly trembling, and stared at his desk. As they left, Hartwell intentionally left his lens cloth behind to create an excuse to return. When he came back, only Martha was home, her husband and son gone to town. Without them present, she appeared frayed and shaken, speaking rapidly, weeping and apologizing for things she wouldn't explain. She whispered that Jeremiah had convinced her they were ending suffering for the weak ones, but admitted it had become something else. Before she could say more, the sound of horses approaching silenced her. She returned Hartwell's cloth, her demeanor closing off as the men reappeared. Hartwell now believed children were being killed. Sheriff Bradenton, pressured by the mounting evidence, sought state assistance, but political entanglements threatened to stall action. Hartwell insisted they could not wait. His fears were confirmed on December 15, 1856. When during surveillance he saw Caleb carrying what was clearly the body of a small child wrapped in canvas toward the woods. 3 days later, before dawn, Bradenton led a raid with 3 deputies borrowed from neighboring counties. They arrived in the frozen morning fog. The orphanage grounds eerily still. No animal sounds, no smoke from chimneys, not even bird song. Fresh wagon tracks led from the house to the woods, stained with blood later confirmed as human. Through a window they saw Jeremiah burning papers in the parlor fireplace. When the deputies banged on the door, he ignored them for nearly 2 minutes, frantically feeding the fire before finally opening it. His appearance so altered by fear and guilt that even Bradenton, who had long defended him, was taken aback. Jeremiah Grimby's usual air of control was gone. His clothing rumpled and stained white hair, unkempt hands shaking as they gripped the doorframe. His eyes, once cold and commanding, now darted wildly among the armed men as though searching for a way out. "Gentlemen, this is highly irregular," he began, voice breaking. "We are a respectable institution, endorsed by the state itself. Surely concerns could be addressed through proper channels rather than this invasion." Sheriff Bradenton brushed past him, the sharp smell of burning paper and the scatter of ash on the hearth drawing his attention. "Jeremiah Grimby, you are under arrest on suspicion of child abuse, fraud, and murder. Where are Martha and Caleb?" From deeper inside came a wail, Martha's voice high and frantic. "The children in the ground know. They know what we did. God forgive us, they know." They found her collapsed in the kitchen beside an overturned chair, clutching a blood-stained apron, sobbing so violently that Dr. Tilton dosed her with laudanum to keep her from harming herself. In broken fragments, she admitted to helping them sleep forever and begged forgiveness for following Jeremiah's plan. Upstairs, Caleb tried to escape through a rear window with a heavy canvas bag. Deputy Pierce, stationed outside, gave chase through the snow and tackled him in a frozen creek bed. Inside the bag were 5 years of records maps of burial sites, inventories of stolen belongings, and a ledger detailing the sale of murdered children's possessions to merchants in distant towns. The search of the main building exposed years of deception. In the parlor, half-burned letters from the state praised the Grimby home's unparalleled placement success, even recommending more funding, an endorsement that now read like a cruel joke. In the dining hall, hidden beneath the serving counter, were neatly stacked plates and cups arranged to look ready for dozens of children, though they showed no signs of use. The pantry held barely enough food for 8 people for a month, and the kitchen was equipped only for small-scale meals, not the feeding of 30 or more. Upstairs, the classroom was revealed as a staged set. Desks bolted to the floor contained no books or papers. A closet nearby held costumes, wigs, and clothing in various sizes, props to make the same children appear as many different ones during inspections. The most damning discovery came when deputies found a false wall in the pantry, concealing the basement entrance. The smell that poured out was suffocating, a foul mix of waste infection and something unnameable. Inside the cramped, unheated cellar, 20 children aged 7 to 16 were found locked in darkness, their bodies skeletal from starvation. They huddled in tattered clothes, some too weak to stand, others bearing untreated wounds, crookedly healed bones and scars from burns and repeated beatings. Dr. Tilton's voice shook as he told Bradenton, "These children weren't just neglected, they were tortured systematically over months and years." But the worst was the way the survivors reacted to their rescuers, flinching at every movement, shrinking from touch, their eyes wide with the terror of those who had learned that adults meant pain. Rather than relief, the rescued children shrank from their saviors, eyes wide with fear. Some cowered in corners, begging not to be harmed, while others sat frozen in shock. A few older ones instinctively positioned themselves to shield the younger, their frail bodies forming a last line of protection, a silent testament to years of shared suffering. Among them was the boy who had tried to signal Hartwell during the earlier visit. Now skeletal and barely conscious, he whispered a truth that pierced through every man in the room. "They pick who dies next. They make us watch." Hidden beneath loose basement floorboards, deputies found ledgers and journals chronicling the Grimby's descent into atrocity. Early records from 1851 reflected genuine efforts at hour and placement, with letters to adoptive families and notes on children's progress. But by late 1852, as financial strain mounted, Jeremiah's writing shifted. Children became burdens, defective specimens, and drains on resources. By 1853, the language was clinical, his so-called practical solutions rooted in an invented science of worthiness. Each child was assessed for appearance, obedience, intelligence, and what Caleb coldly called moral potential. Those who failed were starved, denied treatment, and eventually selected for elimination. The records accounted for 127 children in 5 years. Only the 20 found in the basement were alive. The others' 107 souls were reduced to dates, causes of death, and burial coordinates, logged with a detachment of farm stock records. Caleb's private notebooks were the most chilling. He claimed an innate gift for spotting genetic weakness and described the killings as acts of mercy and social engineering. The burial ground behind the staff quarters turned suspicion into undeniable proof. Under Dr. Tilton's supervision, deputies spent 3 days uncovering 23 lime-covered graves, each marked by a numbered wooden stake. The bodies bore evidence of sustained abuse, healed fractures, scars from beatings, signs of starvation. Some had died slowly from neglect, others violently through strangulation, blunt force, or poisoning. Hartwell's photographs, meticulous images of each grave, the remains, and the few personal belongings buried with them, became some of the earliest forensic evidence ever used in an American courtroom. Toys, scraps of clothing, unsent letters, fragile fragments of stolen childhoods were cataloged and preserved. In the basement, carved names and dates on wood and stone revealed a desperate effort by survivors to memorialize the dead, a secret record that became key to identifying victims and reconstructing timelines. Under interrogation, Jeremiah first denied everything, then reframed the murders as a grim duty, citing European theories of heredity and social improvement. He argued they were preventing lives of misery, freeing resources for the fit. Martha, caught between hysteria and religious fervor, painted a different picture. She admitted resisting at first, but claimed Jeremiah's reasoning and Caleb's conviction eventually broke her. In her most chilling testimony, she described the selection process, how a child would be chosen isolated and prepared, how food and warmth would be withheld, or how a more direct death would be arranged under the guise of mercy. It was a ritualized cruelty, masked as moral duty, and it had consumed their lives. The Grimby's killings were never impulsive. They had crafted a slow, deliberate system of elimination designed to keep deaths looking natural to outsiders. Once a child was marked, the process began separation from the group. Reduced food, withheld medical care, and escalating abuse until malnutrition, illness, and injury claimed them. Caleb, the most unyielding during interrogation, showed no remorse and spoke with cold certainty about the necessity of his actions. He framed the murders as scientific selection, lamenting only that he could not perform them on a wider scale. His evaluations hinged on arbitrary judgments of appearance, obedience, intellect, and moral character, with physical disability, perceived defiance, or even being unpleasant to look at, serving as death sentences. Caleb's cruelty was not confined to killing. He inflicted psychological torment, telling chosen victims they were worthless and would soon die, forcing them to watch other executions. Survivors later testified that these killings were sometimes staged for the entire group, serving both as grotesque entertainment for Caleb and as a warning to silence dissent. The trial of the Grimby family began on March 15, 1857, in Medina County's small courthouse, instantly becoming Ohio's most sensational criminal case. Crowds from across the Midwest and Northeast gathered daily, with mobs threatening lynching. Judge Harrison Wickham was brought in to ensure order and fairness amid the uproar, while reporters from major cities filled the town. District Attorney Samuel Morrison, joined by state-appointed prosecutors, faced the challenge of presenting evidence so horrific that it tested the limits of public courtroom testimony. For the first time in an American criminal trial, photographs became central evidence. Hartwell's images of the basement prison, exhumed graves, and emaciated survivors were so disturbing that the judge ordered women and children removed before they were shown. These photographs stripped away all doubt paired with Dr. Tilton's medical testimony. They proved the deaths were not neglect, but calculated torture sustained over weeks or months. The most devastating evidence came from the survivors themselves. Several older children, despite trauma, recounted in detail the basement's conditions, the selection process, and the killings they were forced to witness. 13-year-old Margaret Henley, who had endured nearly 2 years in the basement, gave the most haunting testimony. Calm and precise despite her frailty, she described watching younger children waste away, Caleb inspecting the group like livestock, and victims slowly starved or beaten over weeks until death. The defense, overwhelmed by the evidence, leaned on claims of mental instability. Jeremiah's lawyer argued that the strain of caring for society's most damaged children had driven him insane. Martha's attorney painted her as a passive, broken woman under the psychological control of her husband and son, incapable of resisting or fully understanding their crimes. Both strategies aimed to shift the narrative from calculated evil to tragic mental collapse. But the evidence told a far different story, one of methodical, willful, and remorseless killing. Caleb's defense was the most difficult to maintain, as his meticulous records and unapologetic testimony left little room for claims of insanity. His lawyer, Robert Chase, tried to frame Caleb's actions as misguided applications of emerging scientific theories on selective breeding and social improvement ideas, gaining traction among certain intellectual circles of the time. But the prosecution dismantled this argument by showing that Caleb's methods bore no resemblance to legitimate science. They were rooted in cruelty, not theory. His own notebooks described in detail the pleasure he took in inflicting suffering and his fantasies about expanding his killings on a massive scale. The trial's most shocking moment came when prosecutors read aloud Caleb's written plans for a statewide and eventually national network of institutions dedicated to systematically eliminating children he deemed unfit. His vision included organizational charts, funding proposals, and recruitment strategies for others who shared his ideology. It was the clearest proof that his actions were not born of necessity or reform, but ambition and sadism. The jury took less than 4 hours to return a unanimous verdict. All 3 Grimbeys guilty of multiple counts of murder, along with fraud, child abuse, and conspiracy. Judge Wickham sentenced Jeremiah and Caleb to death by hanging, declaring their crimes a fundamental violation of civilized society that only execution could answer. Martha, considered mentally incompetent and under the influence of her husband and son, received life imprisonment reflecting the era's view of women as morally dependent on male authority. Jeremiah was hanged in Columbus on September 12, 1857, before thousands. From the gallows, he attempted once more to cloak his crimes in philosophy. Future generations will understand we were pioneers in improving the human condition. The weak must be culled so the strong may flourish. Our only error was being born before our time. Caleb, executed minutes later, shed any pretense of ideology. I regret only that I was stopped before completing my work. The pleasure I derived from their suffering was worth any punishment you might impose. These words, reprinted nationwide, cemented the case as one of America's earliest recognized examples of serial killing, driven purely by sadistic gratification. Martha's life sentence was short-lived. At the Ohio State Prison for Women, her mental health rapidly collapsed. She alternated between long stretches of unresponsive silence and violent episodes in which she screamed about the children in the ground and begged forgiveness from unseen voices. She died in 1863, officially of pneumonia. Though prison doctors noted she had wasted away from refusal to eat or care for herself. The 20 children rescued from the Grimby basement required months of medical and psychological treatment before they could be placed in safe homes. Dr. Tilton's detailed notes on their recovery became some of the earliest recorded observations of childhood trauma healing. While several survivors bore permanent physical disabilities and emotional scars, some were able to build new lives. Among them was 13-year-old Margaret Henley, whose steady, harrowing testimony had been pivotal in court. She eventually joined a foster family in Western Ohio, grew to adulthood, married, and had children of her own. A rare measure of hope to emerge from one of the darkest chapters in Ohio's history. Margaret Henley, whose testimony had helped secure the Grimby convictions, never spoke of her time in the orphanage after the trial. Family records and oral histories describe her as a warm, fiercely protective mother who refused to let her children be alone with any adult outside the immediate family. Her silence mirrored the community's lingering unease, a collective wound the trial had exposed but could not fully heal. In the wake of the case, a state legislative review uncovered widespread failures in Ohio's oversight of charitable institutions. Dozens of orphanages and children's homes operated with little more than self-reported records and predictable pre-arranged inspections, conditions that had allowed the Grimbys to operate unchecked for years. The reforms born from the scandal, where sweeping surprise inspections became mandatory. All child deaths or transfers had to be reported and verified, and adoptive placements were subject to direct follow-up. Institutions were also required to keep comprehensive medical files for every child and to alert authorities immediately to any change in their care. Edmund Hartwell's investigation earned him recognition as a pioneer in forensic photography. His careful documentation of the graves, the basement prison, and the survivors' conditions provided some of the most compelling evidence in court. But it came at a cost. In later interviews, he called the case both his greatest professional achievement and the source of his deepest personal trauma. The techniques he developed, precise measurements, methodical photo sequencing, and comprehensive visual records, set new standards for crime scene documentation across the Midwest. Yet the emotional toll drove him to abandon forensic work, entirely retreating to the relative calm of architectural and landscape photography. The Grimby property itself proved impossible to repurpose. Seized by the county during the criminal proceedings, it sat unsold, the community unwilling to live or work on land so steeped in horror. In 1858, the buildings were demolished rather than left to stand as grim monuments. Even cleared the site retained a grim reputation. Hunters and travelers avoided it, speaking of an oppressive stillness and an unshakable sense of dread. Local folklore grew around it, stories of strange noises and ghostly shapes, though these were likely the echoes of communal grief rather than anything supernatural. The burial ground was relocated to Medina's Woodland Cemetery. Each victim's grave was marked only with a number, a testament to the deliberate erasure of their identities in Jeremiah's records. Efforts to restore those names continued for years as families from across Ohio and neighboring states came forward hoping to reclaim lost children. Some graves eventually bore proper names, but many remained anonymous, an enduring reminder of how thoroughly the killers had sought to strip their victims of personhood. The Grimby case files, Hartwell's photographs, the family's journals, and full trial transcripts were locked away in the county archives immediately after the executions. The official reason was to shield the community from reopening its deepest wound, but the effect was to bury critical evidence from researchers for nearly 70 years. When the records were finally unsealed in 1925, historians and criminologists were stunned. The combination of the Grimby's meticulous record-keeping and Hartwell's forensic documentation provided an unparalleled window into 19th-century serial killing within an institutional setting. Modern criminology now classifies the case as an early example of institutional serial killing murders committed by individuals in positions of authority over a captive, vulnerable population carried out over years under the guise of legitimate care. The Grimby's crimes became a cornerstone case study in understanding how power, respectability, and social trust can be weaponized to conceal systematic abuse. Their ability to operate undetected for half a decade was not a product of isolation, but of deep integration into Medina County's religious, political, and charitable networks. Their public image as pious benefactors shielded them from suspicion even as warning signs mounted. The trial's psychological profiles revealed a chilling division of roles within the family. Jeremiah was the ideological architect dressing murder in the language of social duty and improvement. Martha was the compliant enabler, drawn in by a mixture of fear, persuasion, and gradual moral erosion. Caleb was the executioner, not only willing, but eager, deriving personal satisfaction from cruelty and fantasizing about expanding his work beyond Medina County. This structure leader, enabler, executioner would later be recognized as a recurring pattern in family-based criminal enterprises. The case also underscored the lethal danger of unchecked authority over dependent populations, especially when combined with isolation and weak oversight. The children in the Grimby home had no outside advocates, no means to report abuse, and no contact with inspectors beyond staged encounters. This complete control made intervention nearly impossible until the crimes reached catastrophic scale. Lessons from the case directly influenced reforms, ensuring that children and other vulnerable populations retained contact with independent monitors and legal advocates. Financial records uncovered during the investigation revealed that the murders were not solely driven by ideology or sadism. They were also profitable. By continuing to collect state funds and private donations for children they had already killed, the Grimbys defrauded both public and charitable systems. The fraud was sophisticated enough to survive years of inspections, further highlighting how criminal exploitation of trust can thrive when oversight is weak and appearances are convincing. The money meant to feed, clothe, educate, and care for dozens of children had instead been funneled into maintaining the Grimby family's comfortable lifestyle and fueling their crimes. Even more grotesque was the revelation that they had systematically stripped murdered children of clothing, jewelry, toys, and other personal effects, selling them to merchants as far away as Cincinnati and Pittsburgh. This not only generated extra profit, but also scattered potential evidence far beyond the reach of local investigators. The case reshaped criminal jurisprudence for decades. The court's decision to admit Hartwell's photographs as evidence marked a turning point in recognizing photography as a legitimate, powerful tool for documenting crime scenes and victim conditions. The prosecution's success in convicting all three family members also reinforced that familial bonds did not shield individuals from criminal responsibility. While Martha's conviction, despite her claims of coercion and mental instability, set a legal precedent for holding enablers accountable when their passive cooperation or willful ignorance contributes to crimes, the Grimby case quickly became required study for social workers, institutional administrators, and government inspectors. It exposed the deadly consequences of weak oversight and underscored the importance of independent verification of institutional claims. Religious organizations across Ohio and beyond were forced to reckon with the unsettling truth that religious authority and a spotless charitable reputation could be weaponized as camouflage for exploitation and abuse, prompting demands for greater transparency and accountability in faith-based institutions. Its influence extended nationwide, inspiring reforms in child welfare laws, inspection protocols, and record-keeping standards designed to prevent similar abuses. But perhaps the most enduring lesson was also the simplest outward virtue can hide extraordinary evil. The Grimbies were not able to operate because they were outsiders, but because they were fully embedded in their community, trusted, admired, and shielded by the very systems meant to hold them accountable. Their story forces us to confront the possibility that such calculated cruelty could exist anywhere hidden behind facades of generosity and piety. It is a reminder that trust must be earned through vigilance, and that those most in need of protection are often most endangered by blind faith in appearances. Thank you all very much for watching my video until the end. I sincerely appreciate it, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.